Hello and welcome to Auto Shenanigans. How the devil are you? Have you had a good week? My name is John. Thank you very much for joining me for another exciting Great British Road Journey. Today I'm still in Kent and in search of that Garden of England thing that Kent is known for. Having visited Dartford and Gravesend last week, I've failed so far, but maybe today we'll find some of the promised garden land. Our journey this week takes us from the Kent coast and the town of Ramsgate through Canterbury and Ashford before arriving at another part of the Kent coast where we find our final destination, which promises to be a right treat. As always, to help navigate our way there, we'll be using a copy of my 1923 Michelin guidebook, period correct maps and stuff. We start then in Ramsgate, which according to one source is one of the greatest seaside towns in England. I beg to differ. Whilst there is a functioning harbour pier, there isn't a pier that features a pavilion theatre, coin slot machines or a fish and chip shop, which are sort of the industry standards for seaside towns if you ask me. Mind you, at least it is actually on the seafront rather than a horrible river estuary. Looking at you, Gravesend. In the days of my guidebook, Ramsgate had a population of around 37,000 residents. Today, that's increased to around 43,000, which when we compare that to some of the other towns we've looked at is a fairly insignificant increase in population over 100 years. Despite the town not seeing an increase in population, it's certainly seen a lot of changes over the years, most notably in the mid-1920s when Ramsgate's railway network was completely restructured. The result of this was a short stretch of railway being abandoned. On its own, perhaps not that interesting, but this short stretch of railway for the most part ran underground via a tunnel, delivering passengers directly to Ramsgate's seafront. Whilst this railway was indeed abandoned, the tunnel remained and it would reopen in 1936 as a tourist attraction, although this time with a narrow gauge railway running through it. With a bit of an argument breaking out in 1939, the tunnel was converted to an air raid shelter, and with the construction of new tunnels, it became part of a large underground air raid shelter network. Once things had all settled down a bit, the narrow gauge railway would reopen in 1946 and operate until 1965, at which point it would close due to a minor crash. The tunnel sat unused for many years, but in 2014 it would reopen as the Ramsgate Tunnel tourist attraction. You can go on a guided tour of the tunnel and air raid shelter network, and whilst I don't have time to go on the 1.5 hour tour today, it looks like a bloody good day out. Just on the outskirts of Ramsgate is something that absolutely didn't exist in the days of my guidebook. Actually, it doesn't exist now, but it did. This is the site of Ramsgate Hovercraft Port. A company called Hoverloyd would run hovercraft services from the site here in Ramsgate over to Calais between 1966 and 1982. In the later years, Hoverloyd would merge with another company, Seaspeed, to form the organisation Hoverspeed. This new organisation would focus on services operating out of Dover, and as a result, the Ramsgate Hovercraft Port was closed. It then sat abandoned for several years, but eventually in the 1990s it was all demolished, leaving little by way of any structures, but there is plenty left to explore and keep you entertained. Our next destination is the city of Canterbury, and to get there our old map suggests we take the A253. However, this no longer exists and has been replaced by the A299, a dual carriageway that was built in around 2010 along a slightly different alignment. You know what this means? An abandoned road. Throughout the series, we've seen little sections of abandoned road as a result of infrastructure upgrades. However, in this case, they pretty much left the entire old road in place. So alongside the new A299 runs the old A253. So I suppose if I walk here, we can follow the route as per our old maps, but I probably won't. Whilst you're exploring the abandoned road, you might notice on the other side of the fence a large airport. This is Manston Airport, and it closed in 2014, although it's been used for several things since then, for example as a lorry park when they closed the borders between England and France. What I'm interested in though is the oversized runway, and we've actually seen a similar arrangement before when we visited RAF Woodbridge in Suffolk. During the second small disagreement, the super-wide runway would have been divided into 3 separate lanes or runways. 2 would operate as normal, but the third would be an emergency landing runway where no permission was required to land. If you needed to, you could just fly in and land or crash, depending on the severity of your emergency. It's unclear as to what the future holds for Manston Airport. The latest is that it'll reopen in 2025 as a cargo airport, and if that proves profitable, which it most likely won't, they'll look to add passenger services in 2028. But this is Ramsgate in Kent. The NIMBY movement is strong here. Up next is Canterbury, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. NIMBY heaven, because a World Heritage Site is all about protecting and preserving the historical and cultural importance of places like the Taj Mahal and the Galapagos Islands, and Canterbury apparently My guidebook makes no mention of UNESCO, probably because it didn't exist in the 1920s, and instead it makes suggestions on ancient monuments and churches for us to take a look at, the most obvious one perhaps being Canterbury Cathedral. The cathedral was founded in the year 597, but completely rebuilt in the 1070s, to be then mostly demolished and rebuilt again in the 1300s, giving us the impressive structure that we see today. However, over the years, various alterations and repairs have been carried out, so it's not quite as it was, but close enough. Interestingly, if you have a look round the back, you might find the remains of the infirmary chapel, built in the 12th century. This is probably the oldest surviving part of the cathedral structure. Another old structure can be found a short distance from the cathedral, and it's known as Westgate. It's a medieval gatehouse that was built in 1380, and it's one of 7 gatehouses that surrounded Canterbury. Westgate is the only surviving example out of the 7, and it's said to be the largest city gate in England, standing at an incredible 18 metres tall. Today it's still very much in use as a museum, bar and entertainment venue. It's all been quite nice so far, hasn't it? Maybe Kent isn't so bad after all. We head out of Canterbury via the A28, which makes its way through the Stour Valley and Wye Downs, some of that Garden of England we've been promised perhaps, but then we arrive in Ashford and, yeah... Ashford has grown massively since the days of my guidebook, from a small town with a population of only 13,000 to a massive town with a population of over 83,000. It's mostly down to the various industries that decided to move in and call Ashford home. One such industry was the railway industry, and on the outskirts of Ashford, the South East Railway Company set up a locomotive and railway works in the mid-1800s. With that came Newtown, a small village, if you will, created by the railway company as a place for its workers to live alongside the railway works, which eventually led to around 3,000 people living here. The railway works started to see a decline in use from 1960, and by 1982 it was closed. An interesting structure that still survives is the 1850s built gatehouse that you'll find at the entrance to the old railway works, complete with its clock tower that still tells the time accurately at least twice a day. As we head south away from Ashford, we pass through Ham Street, and it's here that we find part of a Napoleonic war defence structure. It's a 28-mile long canal that was built to make life difficult for the enemy forces. It was believed that an invasion could easily be achieved by the enemy via an area known as the Romney Marshes, so they cut off this area from the mainland with this canal that runs from Hastings to Hythe. Whilst the canal never saw an invasion, during that second small disagreement of 1939 to 1945, several pillboxes were placed along its length for the exact same reason, to make life difficult for the enemy forces should they decide to invade England via Romney Marshes. We'll be making our way across the marshy wastelands via what's marked on our old maps as the B2070. It's not clear if it's still the same today, but I don't see why not. The road will take us through Ivy Church, and I noticed something that might be worth a visit. This is Ivy Church Raceway. You'd never have thought that a village with a population of only 150 would have its own racetrack, but here we are. It's an autograss circuit, also known as a muddy oval, and it's grassroots racing at its absolute finest, further supported by their website, which was clearly designed and implemented in 1998. But that aside, if you'd like to pop down to spectate, it'll cost you a tenner to get in, and it's pretty much guaranteed to be a far more exciting race than anything Formula One can offer at a fraction of the price. Sure, you'll be toileting in a ditch, but who cares? Before we get to our final destination, I was going to stop by New Romney. However, my guidebook suggests that when visiting New Romney, one might like to leave the village and visit St Augustine's Church in Brookland, a short distance away. So I have, and this church is very interesting indeed because its bell tower is separate from the main building. It's of wooden construction and believed to originate from the 1450s. However, before this time, there was a tower of a different shape in its place. And more interestingly, the main church building is older still, having been constructed sometime around the year 1250. Right, should we head off to our final destination? As we head towards our final destination, we drive along the coastline, making for a reasonably nice drive. But the further south you go, and you end up in perhaps one of the most unique places in England. I call it the Wild West wastelands of Kent, but you might know it as Dungeness. And yes, I know it's in the east, not the west. I mean, it's either got dung in the name or dungeon, neither of which sound appealing, and I'm sorry, but this is just a wasteland. There's a road, and that's your lot. Still, at least the views are lovely. Oh, for God's sake. Yeah, that's Dungeness Nuclear Power Station, giving the place a Groom Lake kind of vibe. To be fair, the nuclear part of the power station is no longer functional. Dungeness A power station closed in 2006 and Dungeness B closed in 2021. It's currently undergoing a nuclear defueling process which is expected to last until 2028. The reason it closed is because its pipelines and storage vessels had corroded to an unacceptable condition. Just what you want on your nuclear power station. During the second small disagreement, Dungeness was chosen as one of the locations for Operation Pluto, which stood for Pipeline Under the Ocean. Basically, they installed fuel pipelines under the English Channel to supply our forces in France, but it was so secretive no one knew about it. At Dungeness, any relating infrastructure to the fuel supply system was disguised as a civilian building. One such example still exists, and it's known as the pump station. Today, it's a holiday let, but at one point it would have been pumping fuel across the channel without anybody knowing. We end the episode with the Romney Hythe and Dymchurch Railway. It's a 13.5-mile long narrow gauge railway, although I'm not entirely sure that's accurate. It's more of a third scale model. It opened in 1927 and was the creation of Captain Howie, a racing driver, military officer and millionaire landowner. The original plan was to purchase a railway in the Lake District, but the deal fell through, by which time Howie had already ordered a couple of locomotives and he needed to find somewhere to run them. He found the wastelands of Kent. What's interesting is that it was designed to operate as a proper public railway service, which it did for many years. In fact, for a while, the railway had contracts with the local authorities and schools for the transportation of students. However, today the railway pretty much operates just as a tourist attraction. And there we are then, guys. That's all we've got time for this week. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you liked the video. If you did, there is of course a button specifically for that. And if you haven't subscribed already, please consider doing so. That would be wicked sweet awesome. Enjoy the rest of your week, whatever it is you get up to. My name's John. You've been watching Auto Shenanigans, and I'll see you guys next time for another exciting Great British Road Journey. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.